Return of the Mount Hua Sect. Chapter 276. I am the one who will become the sect leader of Mount Hua. The Shaolin Hall had fallen silent. The Peng family. The crowd, preparing to cheer, were also at a loss for words at the sight in front of them. It wasn't so shocking that a disciple of Mount Hua had defeated the Peng family's Peng Dowan. Hadn't they already shown their skills yesterday? Many of those gathered had already expected a triumphant victory. Still, no one could speak because of what happened on stage. It was that shocking. It wouldn't have been so shocking if Baekchun had just blown the guy off the stage with a single hit. But he hadn't done that. Instead, he had elected to beat his opponent like a dog. Of course, only one thought came to their minds as they watched this scene unfold. Is Mount Hua really that strong? The Peng Dowan of the Peng family was one-sidedly beaten. When the disciples of Mount Hua had taken down their opponents with a single blow, it felt like they were watching a drama, so they could laugh and enjoy it. But this was only rubbing it in all of their faces, and it felt much more different to watch. Baekchun took down his opponent with perfect skills. No one could deny that. When they saw Peng Dowan trembling on the floor, foaming in the mouth, a sense of reality seemed to crash down on them all. Isn't Mount Hua winning it all? But they are the most reputable ones, the 9 great sects then. Isn't the one lying down from one of the 5 great families? Right. Now, slowly, people began to feel the pressure. Perhaps the upward blowing winds of Mount Hua weren't going to end as simple guests. Their reactions aren't what I thought they would be, said Baekchun, approaching Chongmyung. I think I showed them what we could do. Chongmyung laughed at that. Our Dongyong has grown up so much. Now you preach too. Baekchun's eyes twitched at his comments. We grew out of being an annoying pimple. Is that something to be proud of? Not proud of. Baekchun coughed slowly and cooled his red face. But it is quicker than I thought it would be. Did I do something wrong? Wrong? Chongmyung glanced around. The eyes of the shocked people were all focused on the disciples of Mount Hua. Seeing their reactions, he smiled. Right, it can't end with just smiling and having fun. They had to see it clearly with their own eyes. They had to witness just how strong Mount Hua was, just how outstanding its disciples were. Everything they witnessed was spread through their mouths and to the world. To see this day come. Chongmyung looked around. The past few years flew through his mind. I think I might have a nosebleed. When he thought of the time when he had first come back, he wept like the Yangtze River. Didn't he go against those idiots who weren't even proper bandits? Didn't he suffer coming all the way here? Thus, the disciples of Mount Hua could be said to be dignified warriors now. Chongmyung raised his head and looked toward the sky. Sahyong, Sect Leader Sahyong, are you watching? How far I've come. So, compliment me. You're a long way off, you bastard. No, you old man. Chongmyung rolled his eyes. You're supposed to praise us when we do something good. Do you want to ignore the kids? These kids will grow older than the old Mount Hua. Huh? Chongmyung tilted his head. Grow? For real? Had the disciples of today overtaken the ones of yesterday? No. Although the current Mount Hua was gaining momentum, considering its heyday when it was called the Plum Blossom Sect, they were still a ways away. But if a comparison was done with just the disciples of that time and now, would these ones win? Chongmyung tilted his head. No matter how much he thought, he didn't think it would be an easy fight. It was clear that Mount Hua at the time was the sect that had fought for the position of the best in the world. Except for Chongmyung, who was ranked among the top 5 warriors, the others didn't leave a mark. But still, they had great disciples. Compared to now. Right, Wudang. It could be said that the current Wudang position was similar to the position of Mount Hua in the past. Of course, their second-class disciples at that time were stronger than the Wudang disciples now. But didn't our kids also beat up the disciples of Wudang? Doesn't that mean they were at a good level? Chongmyung thought of the second-class disciples when he was the Plum Blossom Sword Saint, compared them to the current-day disciples, and slightly opened his mouth. Wow, these ones win! Actually, it wasn't that unusual. He went through so many hardships, fed them, carefully trained them, and all the while, Chongmyung didn't mess with his own training. It would only be weirder if they weren't stronger than the disciples of the past. Chongmyung glanced at Baekchun. Isn't this guy stronger than my Sayoung too? Maybe their suffering had been worthwhile. The strongest Mount Hua of the past was slowly but surely being surpassed. Once again, Chongmyung admired his own achievements with a warm smile. But Baekchun felt anxious looking at such a smile. Why are you looking at me like that? You're making me anxious. Nothing. You're doing so well. Just tell me if I did something wrong. I'm telling you, you're doing fine. It is more strange when you say such things. Chongmyung, who was pulled out of his warm emotions, blinked his eyes. No, why act like this when I compliment you? It's because you're doing weird shit. You! In the end, Chongmyung and Baekchun fought, making the other disciples come to separate them. On the other hand, the sect leaders of the other sects who were watching this sighed. How is this happening? The blade technique of the Peng family is perfect, and to break it down with just brute force. If the crowd paid attention to the details, then the sect leader would pay attention to the process. The Hebei Peng family, a prestigious family sect recognized for their blade techniques centered around the heaviness of swords. Their ferocious movements had always been the subject of attention. However, the disciples of Mount Hua, who were all known to use a sharp and thin sword, cut it down with force. That thick and heavy blade. It was something that could be said to decimate opponents twice as strong as the disciple if they received the attack head-on. What kind of training needs to be done to make such a thing possible? Baekchun was it. The disciples of Mount Hua were showing amazing skills, but Baekchun seemed different. It was at this moment the name of not just Chongmyung, but Baekchun also entered the minds of the sect leaders. Mount Hua's divine dragon Chongmyung, righteous sword of Hua, Baekchun. One strong person, let alone two, it would be difficult to find even one of these geniuses in any sect. The faces of the sect leaders began to get even more serious when they once again confirmed the force of Mount Hua. No matter how much they thought, it was hard to come up with a person in their sect who could show force like Baekchun. In other words, if the limit was just second and third disciples, it meant that Mount Hua was standing on par with the other sects. And they all looked at Hyunjong. Weird. Until a while ago, they didn't mind Hyunjong of Mount Hua sitting behind them. But when things changed, other things changed too. I feel like I'm being watched from behind. Him being behind them only made them uncomfortable since they couldn't watch his expression. Congratulations, sect leader. If this or that child becomes the sect leader, Mount Hua will have a bright future. Zhao Gai, the elder from the Beggars Union, who came as a substitute for the sect leader, said with a smile. Thank you. No. Seeing how many talented people are coming from the sect, it looks like the bad times at Mount Hua has come to an end. That is too much, but... Hyunjong smiled and continued. As much as those children are, I am confident enough that I will not be ashamed of putting them out into the world. Oh, Hyunjong's face slightly twitched. This isn't easy. He felt like his stomach was clenching as he tried to speak. What? Embarrassed? Well, I am. This wasn't his normal character. Now that we are second to none in terms of skills, I need to have the sect leader. Seeing Baekchun and Chungmyeong screaming at each other, he sighed. I asked them to grow up healthy. Didn't they grow up too healthy though? And does growing up healthy means you need to ruin everything other than health? Congratulations, sect leader, Tangunak said with a smile. I understand your heart, sect leader. He could. Hyunjong was feeling his eyes sting. Jaogai smiled. With this force, it wouldn't take long for Manhwa to reclaim its former glory. We are still a long way off. Long way off. Look at those kids. It shouldn't take too long. I am worried that the time when the 9 great sects become known as the 10 is soon to come. The faces of the other sect leaders went stiff at that. This was such a sensitive topic for them, so hiding their emotions had to be a priority. I feel like I did it again. My sect leader did tell me to shut my mouth. Jaogai smiled. That old raccoon. There was no way someone like Jaogai would make mistakes. This was a mockery of the sect leaders out there with him. Coughs could be heard from all around. What was more uncomfortable was that the words said weren't false either. It was crazy now, and what could just 2 kids do? But what if these kids grew old and led Manhwa in the future? That cannot be ignored. Hodo Jinyin's eyes sunk low. What he wanted the most was to catch up with the Shaolin of his time. So what did this mean? Manhwa is a threat to Wudang. In the past, Manhwa and Wudang were competing not just for being called the best sword sect, but the best sword sect in the world. And people considered Wudang to be better than Manhwa. But despite that, Manhwa was like a thorn under their feet each time they wanted to move up. It seems like we need to take special actions. The eyes of the sect leaders all felt heavy. Cha-cha-cha! Baekchun was frowning. Chungmyeong. It seems like you have been eating non-stop since we came here. One? Chungmyeong held the mooncake that he was eating toward Baekchun. That's not what I mean. Chungmyeong smiled. Normally, when we see something like this, we should eat, right? And if we have to fight well, we need to eat well and be strong. Why do you have to be stronger? You're already the kind who would kick a healthy kid in the face, making him eat only soft foods for the next few months. Well, a lot of people are watching. Shouldn't you show them your decent side? Now? Honestly, it does feel late, but there is a saying that it's better now than never. My Sasuke seems to have too much time on his hands. Chungmyeong smiled as he looked at the fights happening. But Sasuke, it isn't going to always be a situation where you can relax like now. The real deal will come out later today. Huh? It was then. Kwang! A huge sound. All the disciples of Manhwa turned to one side. A man in the white robe with a huge sword was looking down at his opponent with an arrogant expression. On the other side was a man with a shattered expression looking up at him in shock. Oh, Namgung family's breaking mountain sword. Right, as expected of the Namgung family sect. The man in the white robe was looking at Baekchun and Chungmyeong. Breaking mountain sword. Baekchun groaned. Cutting the sword of an opponent was difficult and such a cruel thing to do, because it showed the difference in their skills. Moreover, Namgung's Doe was looking at Chungmyeong and Baekchun like he had lost interest in his opponent. That one's gonna be fun. Chungmyeong chuckled. Look, didn't I say that the real deal would come out today? From now, Chongmyung shrugged. Shaolin must have a plan. They must have delayed the main characters of each sect for the sake of drama. Baekchun rolled his eyes. Conversely, it meant that Shaolin thought of Mount Hua as a sect that would get beaten from the start. Now look there. Huh? A familiar face, right? Baekchun's face went stiff. Jongnam's Jin Gumryung. The figure of Jin Gumryung walking out of the sparring circle caught Baekchun's eyes. Hyung. Baekchun bit his lip without realizing it.